My name's Brent. I'm the lead pastor here for those online that may be watching that don't know me, because I think I know all you in the room. This may come as a shock to some of you. I am somewhat of a driven person. I love the laughs, which, tells me you guys know me. I'm a driven person. I don't like ineffectiveness. I like efficiency. I like moving forward. I don't like sitting still or feeling like I'm on a treadmill or stuck in the mud or whatever analogy you want to use. I really can't stand that. It's like I want to see things moving forward. And if I feel like I'm not making progress, I get very frustrated. Like raising my kids. I feel like I'm trying to get to that empty nest, but I keep failing over and over and over again. Only kidding. I love you, children. You're my blessings from God. But there are times in life when I know the results I want, and I try and I try and I try. And for some reason, for whatever reason, I end up disappointed. And I'm left wondering, what is going on? Why is this not working? I can do what seems to be like all the right things, but then when I look time later, it feels like I'm just in the right place. And for me, there is a frustration that can set in. And maybe you're that way as well. When you look at your life and you don't see growth, the growth that you desire. It can be in you personally. It can be in your job. It can be, in your family. It can be in your faith. It can be in any area of our lives. I can remember in my younger days, I was working in this bank, and it was a great community bank. I started there 9 months after they opened. It was a brand new bank, and I came in, and there was a lot of room for advancement and opportunity because this was, at the time, the fastest growing bank in the history of Arkansas. And I got in at a good time, and I was a hard worker, and man, I just started advancing. And they started moving me places and using me and giving me raises, which are great, and promotions, which were great. But then I remember the one day that I had a review, and the review, I went in, and my review at this point, I don't know why, but it was actually done by the president of the bank. And I went in and talked with him, and I remember thinking everything went well, glowing review, everything's great. But I remember walking out of that meeting going, that left me wanting a little bit. I don't know if he didn't pat me on the back enough or, didn't put another zero at the end of the raise like I wanted. But I just remember thinking, I'm working hard here. I feel like I'm doing a good job. You tell me I'm doing a good job. But now I'm to a place where I felt like I'm stuck. I don't feel like I'm going anywhere else. I saw others around me start to get promoted, and I wondered what was going on. Now, I will say, looking back at it now, 44, almost 45-year-old Brent, could go back to talk to 20-year-old Brent, I'd tell him to calm down a little bit. Things don't move at breakneck speed like this all the time. You're fine. Just sit tight. But I looked around and I thought, what's going on? I'm being left behind, which wasn't true. But I didn't want to be stuck, so what did I do? I said, I'm going to go find a job somewhere else and figure out where I can go to continue pushing forward and really grow. Maybe you've been there before too. But you look and you wonder, what can I do to grow? What can I do to advance in any area of your life? As we come to the end of the I Am series, we're going to look at something Jesus says. And when he says this, he talks about how we should be becoming more like him in the way we think, in our attitudes, in our actions, how we can grow. But as we look at what Jesus says, what I want to remind you is it's just like the frustration sometimes we all experience. We feel like we can be doing everything right and get to the end and feel like we haven't moved. And it's possible that what we think will get us there is not actually what will get us there. And especially when it comes to faith, there is a counterproductive nature. At least it seems counterproductive to me. Because the thing that will help me and you grow the most is the thing I think I'm almost least willing to do. Because it doesn't seem like it should work. And so for me, I think I need to do something different. But what we're going to look at today is Jesus actually saying, no, let me tell you, here's how it happens. And if we will trust him, I can guarantee you we will all find the growth in Christ that we desire and that we're looking for. We're going to go to John chapter 15 today. It's, if you've been with us over these past 6 weeks, we've been kind of progressing. Jesus is describing himself to his disciples and to the people around him. And he's using these metaphors, saying, I am various things. I am the bread. I am the light. I am the gate. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. We skipped I am the way, the truth, and the life because we did that in the fall. And today we come to the last one, though. And all these things is Jesus is trying to give us an indication of who he really is. When we get to John 15, we find that Jesus is not with a crowd. He's with his disciples. They've just spent time in that upper room where they've observed the Last Supper together. And we're told that they're on their way to the garden where Jesus is going to pray. And it's in this same garden that Judas is going to bring the guard with him and the religious leaders. And they're going to arrest Jesus here. And he's going to be rushed into trials. And in just a few hours, Jesus will be beaten, mocked, abused, nailed to a cross, and die. So we're within hours of this taking place. And Jesus is using his time of walking from that room to the garden to kind of give some final words of encouragement, of teaching to his disciples. His final words before their worlds are going to be shattered and they'll be scattered because of his death. So if you have your Bibles, it'll be on the screen as well. John chapter 15. And I want to look and see how Jesus uses this I am statement to describe himself, but more importantly, how he uses this statement to describe his relationship to us as well, and how it will make all the difference in how we grow and develop as people. So John chapter 15, we're going to start at verse 1. Jesus says this. He says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it can be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me, also as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine. You are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. Now, if you've been with us through this series, you know that many times in this series, as Jesus makes these incredible statements about who he is, most of them always point back to something in the Old Testament. They always bring something from Israel's past forward. And this one is really no different. Because it's interesting as you begin to look, Jesus opens and he says, I am the true vine. Which when I read something like that, when somebody says, well, I'm the true this, I'm thinking, well, what's the false one? So evidently there was a vine in play that now Jesus is replacing. And for us on this side of history, we might go, what's he talking about? Well, when you go back and you look at the Old Testament, you understand that God, through the prophets, often referred to Israel as the vine. To understand this, we need to go back all the way back to Abraham, one of my favorite stories. You know, Abraham's just a guy, he's living his life, and God speaks to him and makes a promise to him, and he says, I'm going to make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the sea. And Abraham, I'm sure, was like, cool. And so Abraham gets this promise, and he begins to, his family begins to grow, and then you have the story where they're taken to be slaves in Egypt, and then they're rescued. Moses leads them out, and they go into the promised land, and they're in the promised land, and what we know is that they kind of live for themselves, and they become overwhelmed by the cultures around them and become part of the cultures around them, rather than being this light and this beacon. Because sometimes I think there's a misconception when we hear about God choosing Abraham. We assume that, they had God's favor, and so they were God's chosen people, which they were, but they were never chosen just to be chosen, just because God says, okay, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, I choose you, okay, I'm going to like you better than everybody else. No, God's plan from the beginning was to reveal himself to the world. He has always had a desire for all nations in the world to know him. And when he looked at Abraham, he says, all right, I'm going to do this through you. And so, Abraham, I'm going to bless you, not just so you can enjoy the blessings that I give you, but in the Old Testament we read, he says, I'm going to bless you so that you will be a blessing to all nations. It was always meant to be bigger and greater than just Abraham being good, chosen, selected. It was always for the benefit of the world. But we know, as I said, when they went into the promised land, after the Exodus and all these things, that the nation of Israel never really did what they were called to do. They always fell away from God. They always fell into the worship of idols. They always turned their back on God. And with that, God's plan of revealing himself to the nations was kind of in trouble. And when you look at the prophets and you look and see what they've written about Israel, you understand that this is exactly the image God had in mind, that the nation of Israel was going to be the vine through which the rest of the world was blessed. In fact, I've got a couple of verses to share. Psalm 80 is one of them, where it says this. It says, you transplanted a vine from Egypt. You drove out the nations and planted it. You cleared the ground for it, and it took root and filled the land. Who are we talking about there? Clearly, we're talking about the nation of Israel. Isaiah chapter 5 says this, I will sing for the one I love, a song about his vineyard. My loved one has a vineyard on fertile hillside. He's talking about the nation of Israel. Unfortunately, the problem is, as I said, they were overcome by culture. And Isaiah continues by saying this, then he looked for a crop of good grapes, but it yielded only bad fruit. And we could go on and we could talk about Jeremiah 2 and Ezekiel 15 or Ezekiel 19 or Hosea 10, but all these references are just a reminder that there was a picture that God had in mind, a picture of a vine that was giving life, bearing fruit for the rest of the world to see, to draw people to God. And the nation of Israel failed in that because now they had been unfaithful to God. They had fallen away. And rather than pointing the culture to God, they had lost their influence and effectiveness. They were no longer bearing fruit. And as I said, because it was God's plan from the beginning to be known by creation, Jesus in this moment steps forward. And as he's walking to the garden with his disciples, he says to them, and think about it, these guys were Jewish guys. They'd all been raised in Jewish education. They knew that Israel, they knew the Old Testament. They knew what the prophets had said. And Jesus in this moment says to them, hey guys, I'm the true vine. This would have been like a bomb going off. This would have been just mind-blowing for them because their whole life they had been raised to believe that Israel was the vine, but no longer was the vine tied to a geographic location. It was now tied to an individual, and that individual was Jesus. This radically changed everything. So I want you to understand kind of that backdrop of where the disciples are hearing this. I think that's kind of cool. But as Jesus makes this statement and he says to them, I am the vine, there's some things that we have to understand. Now, I don't know, any horticulturist out there? Any people love working in landscaping and love planting plants? And I'm going to tell you what, beyond mowing my yard and occasionally when you can't see my front door taking loppers to my bush outside, I do try to do it at the right time of year. But, that's about the level of my green thummingness, okay? But even me and my limited understanding of plants and gardening and vines and vineyards and all that, there's some very basics about trees and vine and fruit that I think we can grasp some really important truths about what Jesus is saying when he tells us that he is the vine. One of the things I think is interesting is if you read what Jesus said, there's kind of a progression that is building because Jesus begins by talking about those who bear no fruit. And then he talks about branches that bear fruit. And then he says we can be more fruitful. And then he talks about bearing much fruit. And as we look at this, as people who are following Jesus, what he's telling us here is that fruit should be part of our lives. Not that you eat fruit and enjoy fruit. I like an orange and an apple just like everybody else. But Jesus is saying your lives should bear fruit. And it should be increasing in nature. It should be growing as you live. In fact, not only just growth should happen, it's expected to happen. It should be there. Unfortunately for some, though, I think what happens is we look at Christian faith and we see faith as a destination. We see Christianity as the end point. And we think, oh, well, I've accepted Jesus. I'm following Jesus. That's it. That's all I need to do. But as one pastor I read this week put it, there's more to Christianity than just being one. You see, God desires more for us, and Jesus is articulating this, that growth is expected, but not only is growth expected, growth is necessary. And to think about this, we only have to think about our children, those of us who are parents, those of us who are raising kids, and if you don't have kids of your own, you can think about people who have kids, because this is just so basic. When your child is born, you fall in love with them. You love that child, you hold that child, and you think, I could never love anything in my life more ever. This is the most beautiful, wonderful moment ever. And as much as you love that child, and you love those days when you could put the child on the bed and walk away because they wouldn't go anywhere. And isn't that wonderful? But if that child is 3 years old, and you can put that child on the middle of the bed, and that child has no teeth, and that child is still nursing, and that child is just laying there and has never crawled and never walked. As a parent, what are you doing? Well, you hope it hadn't gotten to 3 years old before you go, something's not right. Something's wrong here. And we have to get this fixed. We have to get to the doctor. We have to go figure out. Because when we see that child, we love that child, and we think, you are the most beautiful child in the world. You guys know I'm not necessarily an overly emotional guy, except on the anger side of things. But when my children were born, I cried like a baby. I mean, it's the craziest thing. That child pops out, and I'm like, I mean, it's beautiful. But if Hannah had stayed that child, that baby, at 22 years old, something's wrong. And yet, for some reason, we look at people of faith, and they've been in the church 30 years, and they still act like they just came to faith yesterday. And we need to look and say, what's wrong? I'm not talking about judging people, and we're not going to go around and say, well, you need to grow, and you are talking to you. No, we all need to have that moment where we look at our lives and we say, okay, am I closer to Jesus today than I was yesterday? And time out. Life is like this. Life is not like this. Okay? So when I say this, I'm not saying, oh, yes, we're all up and to the right and things are rosy. No, my faith journey is like this. You know? It is just like that. But I hope that when I reflect and I look today and I see fruit in my life. I hope that I see that today I have a little bit more fruit, bigger fruit today than I did a year ago, that I look a little bit more like Jesus than I did then. Because if we don't, as parents who maybe see a child who's not developing would freak out and rush that child to the doctor as quickly as possible and say, what are the standards? Where are the benchmarks? Is my child supposed to have teeth yet? Is my child supposed to be on all fours yet? What about crawling? Is my child supposed to be crawling? What about walking? And let me tell you, it's a pain in the butt. That child starts walking, and man, I had to put cabinet things on my cabinets again to keep Julian out. But if he didn't get to the place where he was walking, we would have been concerned, and it would have been an indication of what? Something's wrong. What does it mean if we follow Jesus and we don't see fruit, we don't see increasing fruit? It should be an indication that something is wrong. That's what Jesus is saying here. We need to be in this state of growing in faith. And you see, I think we have to understand is that no matter how far we've come, and I feel like Brent's come a pretty long way in his life. I'd like to think so. But I still know I haven't arrived. I'm a pastor and I haven't arrived. Wow, isn't that amazing? There's still ways to go. There's still things in my life that need to be addressed. I need to continue producing fruit. But it does lead to the question, what is Jesus talking about? What is this fruit that Jesus is talking about? What should we be seeing? Well, I think the easiest way to understand this is just simply this. As I said, I know nothing about trees. I know nothing about plants. I'm ignorant, guys. But I'll tell you what, If I walk by a tree and see an apple hanging off of it, you know what I think? That's an apple tree. Genius, right? What does this tell us? Fruit should be visible. Fruit should be visible. It should be something in our lives that others can see, others can take notice of. You see, sometimes I think as Christians, we have a little bit of a problem because we have so individualized faith that we talk about, well, this is my personal faith in Jesus Christ. It's my faith. And we always do it from this very internal thing. Well, I'm just here to tell you that if your internal faith is not making an external difference, I doubt you have much internal faith going on. It's just an excuse we make in order to say, well, don't judge me. Now, I'm not judging you. I'm just looking. You see, and when we talk about fruit, what are we talking about? The Apostle Paul helps us here. And if you're doing your immersed Bible reading on Tuesday of this week, you'll read this because it's in Galatians chapter 5 where the Apostle Paul says, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Aren't you impressed? Your pastor knows all the fruit of the Spirit. Did I list them all? I hope. Hey, those are the things that Jesus is talking about. Love. Are we loving? And I mean on your Facebook and Twitter, are you loving? Are you peaceful? Are you joyful? Are you gentle? Are you kind? Are you self-controlled? Oh, don't go there, preacher. Are you those things? Faithful. And this isn't for the super spiritual. This is for all of us who follow Jesus, because here's what happened. When Jesus said, I am the true vine, what he's saying is that I'm leaving and I'm going away, but I'm going to give you something greater within you that's better than my presence being outside of you, and that is the Spirit of God living in you. And if the Spirit of God is living in you, it will begin to transform you so that these things begin to overcome you and overwhelm you and become a part of you. Several years ago, I became very convicted in this because I found some rough edges in my life. And I found that I could excuse behavior that didn't need to be excused. And I would say, well, I'm tired, so I have a right to be unkind to my wife, or I have a right to be unkind to somebody I meet, or the person who cuts me off in traffic, or the idiot who takes too much time in the checkout stand, or whatever. I have my right. And Jesus says, no, we don't have a right. That the transforming work of Jesus Christ that's occurred on the inside should produce itself as fruit on the outside, and this is what it is supposed to be. But we can't make excuses. We can't say, oh, well, my faith is personal. I'm just living it in here. Bull. Bull. Never can happen. Because when Jesus takes control of the inside, the outside will follow. We need to look and see, are you following Jesus? Are you showing more fruit today than you did yesterday? I read this week, somebody said, after a few years of being a Christian, you aren't more loving, more joyful, more patient, more kind. We need to sit up and ask ourselves why. It's a valid question. Jesus is saying there should be increasing levels of fruit and it should be visible. Because if we're not seeing the fruit, if we're not seeing the growth, it's probably an indication of a bigger problem. You know, when Jesus makes this statement, he says this, apart from me, you can do nothing. Now, someone should have talked to Jesus. Someone should have told him that in conversation, superlative language is not good. You don't use all and never, always, those are not good words, Jesus. Back it off a little bit. But Jesus does not give us any room to play when he says, apart from me, you can do nothing. And I hope it causes us to sit up and pay attention. As I go home today, I'll drive in my driveway and I'll see that winter has not been good to my trees in my yard. There are limbs scattered across, and eventually I'll pick them up. I'm that neighbor. Yes, you love me. You know what I know about every one of those limbs laying on the ground? It is dead. There is no life. What's crazy is, in the spring when the green leaves starts budding out and it looks beautiful, sometimes limbs will still fall. And they'll hit the ground and it'll have green leaves on it. But you know what's the truth about that limb as well? It's dead. Why? Because it no longer has the life of the sap of that tree flowing, coursing through the veins. We are the same way. You know, sometimes I think we can look connected on the outside, but internally that connection is no there. Apart from the vine, the branch has no life. And I'm curious if sometimes we try to manufacture this in our lives, we try to fake it, we try to fill our lives with things that look good, but apart from Christ, it's only surface work. And no matter how hard we may try to produce fruit, we will always fail. Because Jesus says you can't produce fruit apart from Him. But you know the flip side of this statement? I'm going to use a double negative, so grammar people, hold on. You cannot not bear fruit with Jesus. Think about that. If you are in Jesus, you are going to bear fruit. The deeper principle here, you know, is that Jesus, His life is flowing through us. We will be changed and transformed. The outside will begin to match the inside. But the deeper principle here is this. Whatever we attach ourselves to is what you are going to look like. Think about that. Jesus is saying, remain in me, and I remain in you, and we will bear the fruit that looks like Jesus. But what if we're not attaching ourselves to Jesus? What if we're attaching ourselves to that relationship? What if we're attaching ourselves to that job? What if we're attaching ourselves? You know, we can't look at our lives and go, I don't understand. Why am I such a selfish person? Maybe it's because of what you've chosen to attach yourself to. You struggle with lust. You struggle with greed. You struggle with pride. Again, I ask you, what are you attaching yourself to? Because when we attach ourselves to Jesus, His life will flow through us. And I'm not saying it's an overnight transformation, but as I've said, today you'll look more like Jesus than you did yesterday. Brent's been struggling with issues of anger my whole life. I'm the middle child. I've always had a chip on my shoulder. It's just how it is for my life. But I can tell you today, when my wife and I have one of our intense moments of fellowship, I'm a lot less angrier today. I'm a lot more calm. I'm a lot less to react quicker than I was as 24-year-old Brent or 28-year-old Brent. And I'd love to say, well, I've had 10 self-help tips for you, but there's not 10 self-help tips. It's called, I've just tried in my life to attach myself to Jesus Christ and remain in Him. Now, here's something I don't want you to hear me say today. So go out today and figure out, produce some fruit. Go produce some fruit, because here is the thing. Max Lucado said this. He said, your job is not to bear fruit. Your job is to cling to Jesus. Catch that. Isn't that great? Woo! I love that. I'm not saying produce fruit. I'm saying cling to Jesus. He is the vine, you are the branch. Hold on to Him, and what did I say? Fruit will happen. You cannot not bear fruit when you are talking or abiding in Jesus. Now, I realize you may be wondering, why is this beautiful Brent and Ryan in the morning mug up here? And it's not just shameless self-promotion. Yes, that's part of it. I said it's not just. And if you pay attention to the videos and you like and share them, you too could win a beautiful Brent and Ryan in the morning mug. Suki Joseph won the first one this past week. Congratulations. This is not an original illustration. I heard this and I thought it was too good to not share. Pastor said this. He says, you know, tea. Anybody like tea? Tea is one of my favorite things. I have at least 1, 2, 4 cups a day. I love hot tea. In fact, right here on the front row is my mug that's real tea. This is empty, just so you know. But he said, you know, there's different ways people make tea. Some people are dippers. You get the hot water and you do this. Any dippers out there? It is wrong. Thank you, Garrett. It's wrong. It's very wrong. I've noticed Ryan sometimes, he'll have his tea and he'll stand in my office door and we'll be talking and he'll dip. And he's wrong, Garrett. You're right. He's very, very wrong. You know, and he drinks the wrong tea too, but that's another issue for another day. But you know what? When you're a dipper, you go in and out, right? You just do this, and then you get to the end, and you have to set it down, and again, wrong. They take a spoon, and you wrap it around the spoon, and then you do one of these things. Again, wrong, right, Garrett? Not what you're supposed to do to tea. But that's what we do, is we dip, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of effort. Man, my arm's having to go up and down. Got to find a spoon, got to wrap the spoon around. It's a lot of work. And that's how some Christians are. They dip in and out on Sunday morning. They dip in and out of their relationship with Jesus. And they think this is what it's all about. But I'm not a dipper. I do it right. You know what I do? I get a cup of hot water. I drop a tea bag in. And I just let it sit. And I don't have to do anything else. You know what happens? The hot water gets a hold of that tea bag, and that flavor just releases until it consumes all the water. You see, when it comes to Jesus, I sometimes wonder if we're not dipping in Jesus rather than sitting and soaking in the hot water of Jesus, because when we are the tea bag that sits in the water and just allow the hot water of Jesus, he will activate everything within us that needs to be activated. We don't have to jump up and down and do all this effort and all this work. Jesus does all the work for us. The change will occur. Which one are you? Are you a dipper? Or are you soaking, sitting, abiding, remaining in Jesus Christ, so that we look more like him today than we did last year? I'm not talking about substituting religious or spiritual things for an actual abiding in Jesus. Church attendance might be part of it, but it's not all of it, and that's all you got. You're missing it. You're dipping. Reading the Bible can be a great experience. I hope you're enjoying the immerse reading experience, but if that's all you got, you're dipping. Saving the poor and homeless might be a great way to show the fruit in your life, but if that's all you've got, you're dipping and you're missing it. Because only when we sit and we soak, only when we allow the power of Jesus to come in and overwhelm us and we abide in him, only then can we be set free. Only then can the strongholds in our life be broken. Only then can we be empowered and experience all the fullness that God has for us. You see, it's like this. It's the difference between having a legal standing and a relationship. I've adopted 4 children. Legally, I am their father. It says so in paper. I got it. But do you know, to be their father means so much more than just a piece of paper? Being a father means being there for them, providing for them, listening to them, hugging them, getting up with them at 3 a.m. when they're crying in their bed. It means loving them. It means abiding with them, remaining with them. Yeah, I could have a legal standing with my children, but that doesn't make me much of a father. I can have a legal standing with Jesus where I think, oh, I said a prayer one time, I got wet one time, but we want more than just a legal standing with Jesus. Jesus says, I don't want your legal standing, I want your relationship. And here, back to the beginning, and this is what I'm going to close with. Remember when I said so much of our effort in Christianity can seem counterproductive? We want to do, we want to go, we want to be, we want to strive. And we think this is how results come about. And Jesus is saying, no. Hold on. Stop. Sit, rest, abide, remain. And we go, but, I got so much energy. I got to go and do and be. And if I do A, B, and C, then this will happen. And Jesus says, no, it won't. You know, Martin Luther years ago said, he said something to the effect of he had to pray 3 hours a day. And somebody basically said, why, don't you have so much to do? He said, yes, I've got so much I have to get done. I have to pray 3 hours a day. That's the standing, that's the thought we should have, is that our lives are so busy, our lives are so full. We've got so much to accomplish that we can't even begin to think about it until we sit and we remain and make sure we are with Jesus. Let's close with this. We're wrapping up this series, all these I am statements. And as I was thinking through them this week, I came to this one idea. What's amazing to me about every one of these I am statements is they are related to proximity, closeness. Think about this for just a moment. Jesus, the first one we studied, Jesus said, I'm the bread of life. As somebody that's hungry, what good does that bread do me if it's sitting right over there and I never get up and get close enough to put it in my mouth? Jesus said, I am the light of the world. What good does light do if I'm so far away from it I can't see it to have it light my path and show me where I'm to go? Jesus said, I am the gate and I am the good shepherd. What benefit of that to me for protection, provision, and leading if I'm so far away that I'm not in the pen and I can't hear the shepherd when he speaks? You see, I think this passage wraps it up nicely because Jesus says, don't be so far away from me that you can't hear me. You don't know what I'm saying. Because if you want the bread, if you want the light, if you want the life, if you want the vine, you must be close to Jesus. And you have to stay there. Can't be dipping in and out. We have to stay there. So here's a couple questions. Are you abiding? Are you abiding? Do you see fruit in your life? Do you see growing, increasing fruit? And are you close enough to Jesus to experience him as I am? Let's stand and pray.